walk tight and we're a little streaming. Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour without Joe Yardley again because of bandwidth issues. We're streaming live from Sansar. We're streaming live from the basement. If you're listening to this on the podcast, which is coming out Mondays, then you will not see me and you will not see my guest. You just have to kind of imagine us. It's almost as if this were a sort of orally based virtual world. Um, this is the Drax Files Radio Hour live from Sansar edition. One quick thing before we start: don't try to find me. This looks like the basement at 114 Harvest in Sansar, but this is in fact a very secret duplicate, so that we don't get bothered by constant fans coming in and having to sign autographs and all that. My guest today is Richard A. Bartle, I believe. I'm not sure. Is it Richard A. Bartle or is it just Richard Bartle?
Well, I've got a middle initial, just like a lot of people, so I put it in. Yeah, I'm A. Richard Bartle, called Richard A. Bartle.
I think I'm just jealous because my real name is I don't have a middle name. And I always got really jealous about that.
Your parents were too poor to afford one.
Yes. They I don't know. Maybe I think in Germany it may not be that that widespread. Maybe. So Richard A. Bartle is, of course, a game designer, a pioneer, and I actually have his book here, and this is wonderful because we actually have book props in the virtual world, so we don't even have to read them anymore. We just have them here. No, I actually have it in the physical world too. This is your book, Designing Virtual Worlds, which came out in 2003, but you designed the first multi-user dungeon or MUD in, when was that?
That was in 1978, but it wasn't just me. It was me and Roy Tripshaw, who was one of my friends at the university. So always have to let it be known it wasn't just me.
And you are, that's at the University of Essex where you're still teaching currently, correct?
Yes. We did it as undergraduates at the University of Essex. I stayed on, did a PhD. Then I went off to make millions and millions of pounds in industry, which I did, but not for me.
Of course.
And then I returned. Actually, it was mainly dollars rather than pounds.
I think the game or virtual world industry is almost like the music industry, right? You work, and somebody else is reaping in the money somehow.
If there is any money to be reaped, yes. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I came back as an academic about 10, 12 years, something like that ago. And so now I'm just regular professor at the university. Well, actually, I'm not a regular professor. I'm honorary professor.
Now, I want to start right away with the big question, because I keep annoying the viewers and the listeners with the documentary I'm working on about embodiment in virtual worlds. And your name, Tom Bölsdorf, professor for ethnography at the University of Irvine, always mentions you with the distinction between virtual worlds and games. But now that I have you here, could you please tell me what is the difference between a virtual world and a game? And are we now in a game or are we now in a virtual world?
Okay, well, this is one of those terms which shifts around. From my perspective, virtual worlds is an umbrella term. Some virtual worlds are games, some virtual worlds are not games. All virtual worlds, however, are places where the real and the imaginary meet. Some of them have got a game aspect to them. In fact, most of them have a game aspect to them. Some of them don't have a game aspect to them. Something like this one, well, at the moment, this particular part doesn't seem to have a game aspect to it, but other people might be making experiences which are game experiences.
Well, we're kind of beat it.
The virtual world as a whole is a virtual world, but you could say that for World of Warcraft or any of the other game style virtual worlds.
So an MMO, I'm sorry to interrupt you briefly because it was my mistake that I didn't define MUD, or I have you defined, because I realized maybe people don't even know what that is. People are so used to a visual
it would
virtual
not
world.
Surprise me.
So let's define that term first, because we're in such a sort of dominated by visuals world, and especially in the virtual world realm. But a MUD is a text-based adventure game. And it's funny because I always tell the story that I'm not a gamer, and when I grew up, I was so obsessed with music that while my friends played game and some became programmers and designed their own games, I was just sort of practicing arpeggios and scales in my basement. The only game that I came in contact with at the time was the game based on A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I think Douglas Adams did have a hand in. But please define what MUD is.
Well, a MUD. Okay, so the game that Roy Trubshaw and I wrote together was called MUD, which stood for Multi-User Dungeon. This being 1978, we didn't have graphics. We had teletypes, so things were being printed out on paper, in capital letters at that. So we were rather limited in what we could do, but then again, we were unlimited because you can do a lot more in text than you can in graphics. So that's how MUD, our game, started out. Now, other people played the game, liked it, or didn't like it, but thought they could do better. So they would write their game, and some of them were better, and some of them weren't better, and some were better in some directions, and some were better for particular audiences. People played those games. Some people liked them, some people didn't, and wanted to improve them, and so on and so forth, and that's where we got to today. Now, they were called MUDs at the time because they were named after the very first MUD, our game called MUD, which people then started calling MUD 1 to make it distinct from the umbrella term, as it then was, for all games of this kind. But yes, it was a text world. The things that later came out to be called massively multiplayer online role-playing games were originally called graphical MUDs because we always knew they were going to come, and that's what they were. But the text MUDs, they were, you typed, what you typed was a command, and that happened. And then it just told you what happened as a result of the command, and then you typed more.
So, for example, it would describe, let's say this were a MUD right here. It would describe, the game would describe you are in a room with some microphones and a slightly enlarged telephone.
Yeah, something like that. It would say you are standing in a rectangular room with sound recording equipment bolted to the wall. There is a large poster on one wall, two posters on another wall. South leads to the main room. Then it would say Drax is here, something like that. And then it might list some of there is a book here, there is a slightly enlarged telephone here, there is a chair here. And then you could say, no, sit in chair, or pick up phone, or I could just wave, or I could say, hi, Drax, or anything like that. Whatever you wanted to do, you just type it.
Are those commands, though, are they listed? I mean, in your first game, are they typically listed, or does that vary? In other words, do I have to figure out what I can do, or is that given to me somehow?
well, the basic commands are given to you, the things everybody needs to know how to do, like walking around. We'll tell you you can do north, south, east, west, northeast, southeast, and so on, up, down, in, out. And there's another command, swamp, which moves you in the direction of the swamp, which is an important location. So you would be told that, you'd be told how to quit, you'd be told how to talk. But anything else, you just tried it. If you wanted to pick up the phone, you'd say, pick up phone, and then it would pick up the phone. If you'd wanted to set fire to the phone, you could say, set fire to phone, and then it would say, you don't have a flame. Or if you did have something, then it would come up with some reason why you couldn't set fire to the phone, or actually set fire to the phone. I mean, it would be like that.
Okay. Now, just for all the kids listening, now, did you then, as the game designer, you would have to imagine as many things that people would do, correct? Like set fire to the phone. I mean, a game would.
Well, yes. In this version, the version of Mud from that became known as Mud 1, yeah, you had to write quite a lot of those out, and it grew quite tedious. I mean, there were lines and lines and lines of things like, if you feed this to the goat, then this happens. If you feed this to the goat, then this same thing happens. If you feed this to the goat, then this same thing. And so eventually we rewrote it in about 1987 as Mud 2. And in Mud 2, you just had to say, look, this is the kind of thing you can eat. This is the kind of thing that goats will eat. And then and you just left it like that, and it would do everything. It was very powerful. It had I mean, I can go into details and bore you, but essentially it had a hierarchy of what we called classes. So you would say a cup is a kind of container. Well, we'd say it was a kind of endo container because it held things inside it, and it was also a kind of portable object, and it had this mass, this volume, and then it would have it would be made of pottery. And if we said it was a kind of pottery object, then that means that if somebody tried to set fire to it, it would say you can't set fire to that.
I understand.
But if it was made of wood, then it would say you set fire to it, and then you'd probably, if you did set fire to it, it might, depending if it had anything in it, it might put the fire out or not. It really depends.
But now, I mean, I imagine that this is, I mean, it's a Herculean task, but it's also a lot of fun to imagine all the things. I mean, it's like writing the most the biggest choose your own adventure book in the history of mankind if you get really obsessed.
It is. But having done it for one thing, you then don't have to repeat it for everything. So if I say pottery is a kind of non-combustible, then I know that anybody who tries to do anything with it for being non-combustible, it will treat it properly.
No, I understand the technical aspect of it, but I was just imagining how cool it would be. I mean, now that you're designing this hierarchy with the class system, but then going back even further, again, sort of deliberately going back into the Stone Age of design, write something witty for each and everything that you can imagine that is sort of very customized. Like, what kind of idiot would put fire to the phone without answering it first or calling your mom or something like that?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty well it. It was it's the sort of thing that programmers do anyway. They're always looking for edge cases and what kinds of inputs might cause problems. It's just that we had fairly unlimited input. So that was we were constrained because we didn't have, well, we had an enormous computer, but by today's standards, it wasn't very powerful. Yeah, we did put in we thought if you add something, you think, what are people going to try to do to that? And then you'd put them in, and sometimes we'd call them silly. We said it was a silly. So just to give somebody a reply to say, yeah, we did think about that. Yeah, we did think that people might try to urinate on a fire to put it out. So, and Mud 2 did actually let you do that. Not if you were female.
Hmm.
You had to switch sex to do that, which it also let you do.
That is amazing. I mean, you also, I mean, you also write. Do you only write science fiction, or is that a genre, or I'm just
Well,
wondering. Yeah.
I mainly write feedback for student assignments. That's what
Uh,
takes all my writing time. But for other things, if I'm going to write something, it'll either be an academic paper or some academic text like that book you've got over there,
well,
or
on your
it'll
website,
be
you do have some short stories in
yeah,
that
yes, I
realm.
do have short, yeah, but I also do write fiction, yes,
The reason I'm
but
asking is, do you see yourself? How is that in relation of between computer science and writing? Is that something that is very different, or is it very related, or can it be?
well, from my point of view, programming is like plotting. So if you're plotting a story, then effectively you're um, creating a series of events with preconditions that have to happen in the right order and so on.
Hmm.
So plotting is a lot like programming, but having written a plot doesn't mean you've got a story. Then you actually have to write the story that
Hmm.
fits the plot. Um, now, as it happens, I quite like doing that. Um,
The reason I'm
but
asking is I cannot get into programming. I'm trying to convince you to find a way to convince me that this is something that I could be doing. I'm getting stuck in some very preliminary courses, and now I'm reading this book, The Three Body Problem, by a Chinese author who was a programmer, and this book is a massive, amazing work in science fiction, but I'm getting off a tangent. So to you, it's related because there is a logical structure that is kind of similar in sort of the framing aspect, but you have to fill it with life, I guess. Do you
yeah,
have?
you have
Yeah.
to write the story to it. There's a difference between a plot, which is a causal series of events, and the narrative, which is the way that series of events appears on the page as it's told to you. So with programming, you've always got the plot, which is the code, and then when the code is executed, the input comes in and it produces the output, and the output is generated in part by the input, but mainly by what the code does with the input.
Hmm.
Now, with the story, you've got a plot, but that just says this is what happens and why. But when you're writing it down, um, you're not just writing down the plot because a lot of the fun in reading comes from reconstructing the plot from the story that you're given. So you're being
Hmm.
told this is these events have happened. These are the particular people, the particular occasions, the particular things around you, what they feel, and from there you construct your own internal model of what these individuals are like and how they would behave, and then would they have done that? Could they have done that? Well, maybe I've got my interpretation wrong and they're actually lying, or things like that. So there is quite a bit connected there, but you don't have to be good at programming to create a plot, and you don't have to be good at plotting to create a program. And but it's just that if you are, then it probably gives you an advantage. Actually, being a musician should give you an advantage in learning to code. A lot of they say that
That's what
the,
everybody
the
says.
yeah the best coders um, are also good at either mathematics or physics or music. Those
Hmm.
are the kind of what the background is. So uh, you should be well
I'm
in with
I'm
a
the
better
only
chance than
exception. I'm
most.
I'm I'm the outlier that proves this theory wrong. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
but now, see, now we're circling back to the difference, because what you're it makes total sense to me what you're explaining, but you're still in a linear world, if you will, that is controlled by the person who is constructing, either when we're talking about fiction, the novel or the program. Now, going back to my initial question about the difference between a virtual world and a game. I mean, a game is, as I understand it, on the most rudimentary level, a game is limited in by the set of rules that is sort of dictated upon me as a participant in that game by the game god, and a virtual world theoretically doesn't have that. Of course, the limitations are set by the platform, but is that sort of the main difference?
No, because you do get sandbox game worlds. Essentially, you can take. You don't have to think of there being game virtual worlds and social virtual worlds.
Hmm.
And this is what a game was. Like a game one is basically a social world with a game overlay, and you can examine what a game is separately from virtual worlds. So a game is it's where people willingly and knowingly agree to abide by a set of rules in order to gain some benefit. Now that's actually play, as I just described it. The difference between play and a game is that you can win or lose or draw a game, but you can't win play. So you can play with a ball, but that doesn't mean it's a game. It's only a game if there's some way of
I see.
winning or losing. Now, that's just in general. Now, if you look at a virtual world, which for me is any virtual space like this, or like Lord of the Rings Online or anything like that, whether it's a game or not, it comes down to, can you win, can you lose? Well, you can't really win those games, which is a shame because you should be able to. You can sort of lose, but when people are trying to win, they've got goals and they set themselves goals that they can try to achieve, which the game then recognises as being a success.
Wait a minute, you just mentioned Lord of the Rings Online as which is sort of a role-playing game that you
Yeah,
can't win it. I mean, do you mean by that you can't win it in the sense that normally if you win a game it's over basically, and then you kind of have to start again?
yeah,
So is that what you mean, Lord of the Rings Online? I had never played it, but I'm assuming it's kind of like World of Warcraft in the sense that
yeah.
I go on raids and missions, but I'm still sort of never achieving dominance or whatever the
Yeah.
final sort of goal
It's
is.
like it's like Dungeons and Dragons. You can
Hmm.
lose Dungeons and Dragons because you can get a total party kill. But what tends to happen is people just stop playing it. And similarly for today's MMOs, they've got this game element to it where it's not just play, because you're not just sitting around messing around doing nothing. You are doing it, and it's with goals driven, and the goals are set by the game designer in general, and they're supported by the game. But you can't really win it because the marketing people don't want you to win it, because they think you wouldn't come back if you'd won it, whereas you probably would come back time and time again if
They
you
gotta
if
string
you'd
you
won it.
along. Hmm.
Yeah, but you could lose it. You could find it too frustrating, too annoying, or too boring, and then it's kind of beaten you, so you stop playing.
That's good. That it beats you like a book you don't finish. Then the book has won.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, you rarely hear people talking about, like, I'm useless at books. I keep reading the same page, but I can't get. You don't really hear that with books, but you do hear it with games.
Yeah,
That's one
yeah.
of the differences. But with something like the regular virtual, well, I say regular, a world like the one we're standing in at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I
it's
have to say, because it was always my understanding that uh, um, that the that, for example, Second Life, and now here's sort of the successor, if you will, Sansar and these
Yeah,
others.
Sansar. Yeah.
The difference is that uh, I mean, I would still be confined in Lord of the Rings Online, I suppose. I couldn't go in there with dreadlocks and sort of a phaser gun because
Yeah, that's right.
it's embedded in a context of a world that is of a certain era and of a certain sort of framework that I'm not allowed to kind of expand
Yeah,
on that.
it's a world that has a fiction, and the fiction um, doesn't allow certain behaviors because they're part of the game.
Hmm.
If people go to play Lord of the Rings online, they don't want people wandering around in Star Trek uniforms.
Hmm.
However, the fiction isn't what you'd call real. It's not even real in the sense of the books, because things like you can wear all the different armor that you're supposed to be that you've bought, but it might not look very good. So you want to make it look as if you're wearing something else. So you say, this is what I want it to other people to see when they see me, but I'm actually wearing all this hefty armor. Now that doesn't make sense in the fiction of the book Lord of the Rings or Middle Earth.
Hmm.
Tolkien's paracosm is the world he built in his head. But nevertheless, it's something the players want, and they're prepared to accept that. But they wouldn't accept somebody going in there and bringing in a different fiction.
Yeah, but see, but this is where I always thought, and again, I mean, I don't know if this is really if there is a definition that is sort of the canon, and if you have a different opinion than the definitioner police will call you and put you in jail. But I really thought that one of the defining factors of a virtual world would be that there is just like sort of just like in the physical realm, there might be a societal consensus that you don't go in a bikini into the opera, let's say. But other than that, it's fairly free to engage or to choose a expressive mode. That there is seriously no limitation, like well, like Habitat from LucasArts, and then Active Worlds, and then Second Life, and that is a fundamental difference between this category and, on the other hand, the World of Warcrafts, the Lord of the Rings onlines.
Well, you see, I've seen these things before in text days, and there were text worlds which didn't have any game aspect to them, but nevertheless did have a fiction. So you could go into the game, into the virtual world, and there was no points, no quests, no raids, no tanks, no the healers. It didn't have any game aspect to it.
That's fascinating.
But nevertheless, it did have a fiction to it. Now, the first one of those that I heard of was one called The Void, which was basically a sex game. But people would go in there and role play, and they did not like it. Well, from what I hear, I never actually played it myself. They did not like it if you went in there and role played something out of context. Similarly, there was some in the same way that mud is like the progenitor of most of today's what I call virtual worlds, but you might call virtual worlds and MMOs, depending on how you want to use the umbrella term. There were precursors to Second Life and Sansar, and these were there was a great schism in about 1989 when the social players split from the game players, and we got the game players went off and played LP Mud and Diku Mud, and ultimately Diku Mud won. A couple of thousand of those around it in the early 90s. But the social players, the ones who wanted the virtual world experience without wanting it to be a game, they created what became known as the moos, mucks, and mushes. There was a tiny mud was the first one. It just took all the game elements out. But the second life of its day was Lambda Moo, and this was a virtual world which laid a lot of the foundations for managing social worlds that we still see today. But some of those worlds that were created then were created for a purpose, not just for entertainment or hanging out. So there was one, for example, which was for people who'd been abused in real life to go and hang out with other people who were also had been abused in real life. And they didn't want anybody going in there who was likely to cause trouble, for example. So they had their own rules, and some of those rules would be social rules. Others were you don't get through the door unless you can convince us this kind of thing rules. But some of the things that you could do in those worlds were also constrained. So there were things you could play with. This is from my understanding, because I've only ever read books and papers that mention these worlds.
I'm actually looking up Lambda Moo, and on the blog I will find some information. On Monday the podcast version will come out, and we'll put some information out there, because I also don't know what the graphical aspect of Lambda Moo, for example, was. But
it had none. It had no graphics.
So that was I was going to ask. So it's really just also. That's fascinating, Richard. This is so fascinating to me. So they stripped all. Now, I, as a virtual world enthusiast, were like, oh my God, now, you got a text thing, and then they strip the game elements from it. What is left?
Yeah.
It's basically a sort of group therapy room.
No. The Moo code base was a system that you could take and use to create your own world. You could, in theory, use it to create a game world, but nobody really did. The main one of these worlds, the one that everybody went to play because it had all the players, was called Lambda Moo. But that itself wasn't an area for people to go and have for therapy. Other people wrote their own ones, and they would generally be called something like Else Moo, which was the generic term that you gave to another one of these. Moo stands for Mud Object Oriented, by the way. So I met them in Else Moo, meaning another one. I don't remember what its name was. So generally, when the papers were written about these, the academic papers, they would always refer to them as Else Moo, so that they didn't identify it, so that people couldn't go there. But even Lambda Moo, people would build areas for particular types of experience that you might want. They might, or particular fans of things. So you might find there'd be one area where somebody was really into Star Trek, and they could build a Star Trek world, just like you could build an experience here. I remember reading one paper where somebody was saying that he'd built this area. No, it wasn't him. He'd come across this area. He was basically looking to see if there were any gay people in Lambda Moo. And he came to this one area, and it had all these hidden clues that he said, things like Greek statues of young men and so on, when he thought, well, this is, somebody's put these in together. This isn't coincidence. And so then by exploring it and doing, just trying commands out that he thought might be relevant, then he opened the portal and got into the world where all the gay guys used to hang out. So it's a bit like that. I mean, here, if you want to create, say you wanted to create an experience, it would take you some time, because you've got to find all the objects, put them all together in a coherent fashion, and then attach functionality to them. Now, you had to do the same thing in Lambda Moo, but you could create any object you wanted. You didn't have to say, okay, I want to buy a telephone. Has anyone made a telephone?
Right.
Hooray, they have. Or, oh no, I'm going to have to make my own telephone. Now it's going to be really difficult. Now in Lambda Moo, you just made it, or you just copied another one that someone else had made because it was text. So it was so much easier to do that.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reading this up. On GitHub, you can actually find the source code for Lambda Moo. And I guess, like you're describing, I could now create my own Moo based on maybe Nightmare on Elm Street, just to name a random 80s horror film.
You could, and no one would play it.
Yeah, but I would be very happy. I could play it with, I don't know, maybe with two other people. We're in a world of niche, which is wonderful.
Yes.
With coexistence of niches.
Yeah, it isn't so much that these games have declined in number.
That would be my next question. That's good that you're taking it there. I was going to ask you, what is in your sense, what is the status of these games now vis-a-vis all this hyper realism and the physical based rendering and all that?
Well, these games are for people who prefer to render things in their imagination. The number of people playing them isn't probably much lower, or it might indeed be higher than it was back in the day. But most it's completely dwarfed by the number of people who play graphical worlds, and of course the number of people who play the social worlds and the non-game worlds is completely dwarfed by the number of people who play the game worlds. So it's a very small market, but it was 11% of the internet before the World Wide Web came out.
Wow.
11% of the bits on the internet belonged to MUDs. But
So I was saying earlier that tongue in cheek, that all that's left from a MUD that is stripped of its game elements is sort of a room where people are talking about their problems, like a chat room.
For some people, yes. But for other people, it's the door to creativity. They're no longer being dictated to by the people, the gods of the game world. Instead, they can become, demigods, not actual gods, but they can create their own content. They can create their own subworlds.
Well, I was just going to say, because that would be actually very attractive to me in the sense that you could role play. I was just in England to interview a woman who is very active in Second Life for this documentary that is work in progress, and she has two daughters. It was fascinating. She's active in Second Life. She's also a Buddhist. She runs a sort of a Buddhist community. And I asked her 16-year-old daughter what she thinks of all this. And here's the most fascinating thing, Richard, what she said. She said, well, I think it's great what they're doing, but I'm not so interested. And I said, well, are you doing any kind of play? Or that, yeah, we do role play. We do text role play on Instagram or on Facebook Messenger. And I had never heard of this. Yeah. So they have very intricate worlds where they have characters. The characters have certain characteristics. It's basically, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons via Facebook Messenger in a way.
Yeah, people have been playing Dungeons and Dragons over internet relay chat and things like that for a long time. I'm glad because no one plays a text world if there's graphics, because you see the graphics and it just tells you there. Getting over that initial hurdle to get into a text world is beyond most people. They see the graphics, they know they're going to like that. But a text world, I get all my final year undergraduates to play MUD 2 as I just sit them down for 2 or 3 hours and say, look, here you go, play. And they're saying things like, how do I move?
So through your
job, pick up the object?
Through your teaching gig at the university, you have your own focus group, basically. So that's perfect. So what do they say? I mean, do they find it interesting? Do they say with respect, well, it's great, but it's really antiquated? Or tell me more about that.
No, they don't. No, because for them, it's a new experience. It's not an experience that they necessarily want to repeat, but if you're playing an MMO, or even if you're wandering around creating things in something like Sansar, the number of commands that you can issue is basically, it's going to be either there's some command window where you actually type text, just like in a text world, or you're going to be clicking on icons, clicking on windows and opening things up and eventually getting to do what you want to do. Now, there's a limit to the number of those you can have on a screen. Mm-hmm. So say you wanted all the different emotion commands, smile happily, smile sadly, smile ironically. If you wanted all these things in something like World of Warcraft, there has to be a button for it. There might be a button that opens another window, and the other window's got a great long list of it, and you scroll through and you click on the one you want. But there has to be a button for it. Now, in a text world, the buttons are the words. You can just type what you want. If it's there, it works. If it doesn't there, well, it'll come up with something sensible. So, I mean, I didn't really expect to be getting into discussing text and graphics. The thing is that
I find it fascinating because I think that's and I heard you say this in on other occasions, and I think we're very much aligned in the sense that well I don't know. Let me ask you: are you worried about the over the victory of the visual world over the text world? That this is in fact very much contributing to a loss of imagination and sort of keeping us in a loop of I don't know. I feel that it's a loop of nostalgia, which is exemplified in the Ready Player One, which had a really interesting review in the New Yorker, which I also will link on the blog. But yeah, I mean, it's there. We're losing something, no?
Well, we lose some things, we gain some things. I'm not okay. So this is something that I've said before. So forgive me, podcast listeners and streamers, if you've heard this before. This is actually an argument comes out of something Isaac Asimov wrote. So
who?
Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer.
Yeah, sorry.
So originally we have text, and then we say, okay, well, let's add graphics to the text. So we add graphics, and the graphics are all flat and square. And then we say, well, let's make it look a bit more real. So we add in little sprites and it looks a bit more like it. Then we say, oh, well, we're still kind of looking at this from above. Let's give a more first person or a third person camera just behind you kind of view, and make the world 3D. So the world's 3D, and okay, that looks great. But obviously, we know that that's not going to be the end of it. The next thing's going to be VR. So here we are in a VR world where you can see things, not just stereoscopic 3D, but you can move your head around and all sorts of stuff. That's great, but you're still just seeing things, aren't you? So what's going to happen next? Will we see things? We can hear things. I guess we could be feeling things. So after a while, it'll be, let's put on the suit up before we start to play. And then when things happen, we can feel the little things. Oh, someone shot me. I know where they shot me because I can feel it. And I've seen VR suits like that at some shows. But of course, even that's no good because gravity's still got you working down, hasn't it? You can't fly in that. You still feel it. So let's say, okay, imagine that in the future you put on this special suit and then you get into a tank. I don't mean a tank that shoots bullets. I mean a tank that's full of a fluid. So you get into this tank with a fluid in it, and it's like a gel, and you've got a breathing tube. And then they can harden the gel around you using electro whatever zappy things, so that now when you're moving and so on, you can actually feel as if you're moving how you're supposed to be moving. You can feel like you're floating and so on, because people can move the gel and harden it in just the right fashion. So now you feel a bit more you're in the world. But of course, there are some things you can't do because you won't be able to move very quickly even if you want to. And also, you're still constrained by your own physical body. So what happens next? Well, let's say we go full on neural interfaces. So you get a little jack planted in your spinal column, cyberpunk style, and you just stick the little connector in, and now you're no longer in control of your body. You're in control of your virtual body in the virtual world. So now everything that you do is being transmitted to receptors which are controlling the body in the virtual world. Now we're really getting somewhere, because now you can sprout wings and fly.
Mm-hmm.
You can have an extra set of arms if you want. You can do all these things, and you can see so much better than you could in the real world. But of course, what you are experiencing there is still something that somebody there has created and designed and is showing to you.
Well,
So
unless it becomes a ultra futuristic version of the concept of Second Life, where I just have a blank piece of three-dimensional paper and I put the colors on it.
Yes, but what happens there is other people see your colours. If you draw in your on that sheet of paper I don't know, let's say it's a wolf,
Mm-hmm.
and you can describe this wolf, and you create this wolf, and it looks huge and ferocious and red-eyed and drooling and all sorts of things. You think this is really going to frighten people. Everybody who's in the game sees that wolf. Now, some people will be frightened by it. Some people might be frightened too much. Other people might just say, just a big dog. What you want to be able to do is, instead of showing them the wolf to their senses, so that you're saying, you're communicating through their senses. You're saying, here is an image, 3D living, breathing image of a wolf. What I want you to do instead is put it into the brain directly, the imagination,
Mm-hmm.
so that rather than they seeing your version of what you think is a scary wolf, they see their version of what they think is a scary wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were dreaming, what would they dream as a scary wolf?
I see
That's what you want them to see.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than communicating via, I have made this change to the world, the change to the world is being broadcast through pixels to you. You are receiving those pixels and then reconstructing in your internal model of the world inside your head what you're seeing. We want to bypass that. We want to be able to say, get past that layer of communication and just let me put straight into your head the concept of this absolutely fearsome, frightening, gonna rip your head off wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there a technology for that? And the answer is yes, text.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow,
that's the argument. And yeah, it's something I've said
well
before,
mm-hmm.
but
No, I'm glad that you said it here. I'm sorry, I'm stepping on you. I'm so glad that you said it here, and I'm going to transcribe this and have it handy when when people ask me, did you see movie XYZ? And I said, no, I'm not interested in it. I'm reading this and this book, and then they will say, oh yeah, right, they're making a movie of it. I'm so excited about it, and I will say, no, I'm not excited about the movie version of the book, because the movie version will destroy my world that I have constructed in my head by reading this book. And again, this is not podcast listeners know, like, oh, now Drax is going on his high horse. No, it has nothing to do with feeling superior or anything. It's very simple. It's a world that I can construct in my head, and it is being flattened. It's almost like the book is a three-dimensional world, and the movie flattens it to a two-dimensional painting, which may be very well executed, but is still just a flattened version of it.
Yeah. Of course, with some, they're different media, and different media can be used to say different things.
Right.
So yeah, I watched Ready Player One, and I'd read the book to the book, but I preferred it as a movie,
Mm-hmm.
not as the story. But as a movie, I thought it worked really well.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. Everybody's. I have to watch it because I just it's so in everybody's mind and in the context of virtual worlds. I'm looking at the time because I need to I only have you for 9 minutes, and this is such a plethora of wonderful information and food for thought. So let me thank you right here, and I need to squeeze this in now. Why did you? Okay, since we're on that subject, very briefly, did you think that Ready Player One would um, entice moviegoers to try out the virtual world genre? I and many others have predicted that that is really, frankly, dumb to believe that for many reasons. And I heard someone say that the movie emphasizes the escapist aspect. So why would people who are already sort of not comfortable with a virtual world concept seek it out if the movie sort of the subtext of the message is that the reason why people go in there is because the world is in shambles. So I haven't seen it, but I wonder what you think about the movie broadening the conscious about the fact that we have rich virtual worlds and MMOs for people who were not aware of that.
Um, it's going to work perhaps for a younger audience. The older you are, the less likely you are to want to to be swayed. I mean, it's got so many 1980s tropes to it that a lot of the younger audience wouldn't really know what it was about anyway. So in that sense, it's not going to attract many in there. Also, I mean, as a virtual world, I mean, it's not a true reflection. You've got a world like that, and there's where are the griefers? Where are all the people who are ruining the game for everything? Where were the flying penises? So,
oh, there was nothing in the movie. I'm very disappointed.
No, sorry to disappoint you. So it wasn't how a virtual a movie quite well. I mean, my wife enjoyed it. She doesn't play games, but doesn't play virtual worlds. Doesn't, but she liked the movie. I don't think it's going to attract lots of people to try virtual worlds, but the thing is, not everybody needs to. Mm-hmm. The people who are in virtual worlds will see them as wonderful places of freedom, and that's what they were meant to be. They were always created to be places of freedom. And Roy and I made the first one because we didn't like the real world and we wanted to give it effectively some competition. You know, we wanted a place where it was a lot fairer than the real world, where you weren't tied down by how old you were or what you looked like or what colour your hair, skin, eyes were, what gender you were. We wanted to create a world where you weren't nailed down by reality. So it was always about that kind of freedom. Now, some people quite satisfied with reality. They don't mind their lot, or they might like it, but think, oh no, if I play this game, then I won't be able to spend time with my kids. And so, well, yeah, that's fine. It's not for everybody, just like books aren't for everybody, sculpture's not for everybody, interpretive dance isn't for everybody. Some people...
Well, I slightly disagree with you in the sense that I think the human spirit and the human intellect always has a benefit from exposing oneself to other ideas. And I think for me personally, virtual worlds, Second Life in particular, of course, is a wonderful microcosm to find out different, basically walk through other people's minds, if you will, if they, whatever they build, or so that diverse society. And again, I mean, I'm an extrovert in the physical world, so I have no shortage of interaction, and I seek it out. But it's nothing compared to basically I'm turning on my laptop and here is this rich world that sort of equalizes, exactly like you said, equalizes in a good way, I think, human interaction, because it gender, socioeconomic status. I mean, to some extent, of course, you need a good machine and an internet connection and all that. But you see what I'm saying. so when you say it's not for everyone, yes, and here I am, the dictator. I say it should be. It's like kids eat your broccoli. Kids go into a user-created virtual world and broaden your horizon. Isn't that what you say to your students? I was almost going to send my son to your university, but now I'm hesitant.
Okay, well, no, yes, people's they should have a broad education, but the trouble is, not everybody's like you and I.
Yeah.
Some people would be going into those virtual worlds and they would be changing the worlds in ways that you might not like. Now, it's always the thing with culture. Now you can create your own subworlds where, okay, I only want people who want to walk through people's minds and wonder at what they see, rather than people who walk through people's minds and attempt to change what they see in ways that you don't want them changed. I mean, I'm sure you can think of all manner of people who would, given a choice in a virtual world, would be using it merely as a conduit to change the real world,
right?
In ways that, so they don't care about the virtual world. So in some cases, you've got to be careful what you wish for, because it might come true. At the moment, we don't have enough worlds. Now, something like Sansar, where you can create your own experiences, that's actually pretty good, because you can create long tails where people with very specific interests can go and find what they want, or even not even you can find out if you're interested. That's the thing,
right?
But they want to go to the worlds because they want to have power they don't have in the real world, and the people might want to go into a virtual world because no one likes their ideas in the real world. And there's enough room for everybody, but when it's so expensive to make them, you've got to be careful what you can allow and what you can't.
Yeah, from the platform provider's point of view, I mean, that opens another big can of worms, because that's what we often discuss is, of course, the aspect of that we're always playing on somebody else's playground. We really don't own the playground, and if the provider doesn't like the sandbox that we're building, we might be gone or severely restricted in the type of sandboxes that sand castles that we're building in that world. Okay,
Well,
we're reaching the top of the hour. I'm curious, just briefly, what do you teach and how do you interact with those students? I mean, it's a related question. What do you see them being excited by? And it's actually great to hear you being excited about the about the growing of this segment into the future with all these futuristic technologies. Not that I ever perceived you as sort of sitting there like, oh, the kids should read more books. I hope that I didn't come across that way. This is also very much tongue in cheek.
Well, they should read more books, and they should play more games as well.
Yeah, but shouldn't they go into the financial sector to bring the economy back? Isn't that the goal?
They can't all work in the financial sector.
Right.
No, my students, I've got some people who just want to study. I teach game design, virtual worlds and game design. So virtual worlds covering MMOs as well as worlds like Sansar, social worlds. About a third of my students are there to study games, game design. They want to work in the games industry. They want to make their own worlds. Another third are straight computer science who nevertheless are interested in games. They see them as having some potential for programming, and they're generally curious about things in general, so they've got an open mind and they study game. They come do my course because that's what they want to. It's one of the options. They could have chosen artificial intelligence, or they could have done web design or something, but they went for games because that's what they thought would be more intellectually rewarding for them. And then the other third of the students are the ones who are so bad at programming that they would do anything to avoid programming. So they take the lectures that don't have programming, and mine doesn't. So that's me. So I don't see many of those. I don't tend to turn up at the lectures.
Are you competing because you were saying like people should read more and should play more games? Are you competing within the universe? I mean, competing quote unquote in the sense that there is a perception like yeah, maybe I don't need this. The reason why I'm asking is I study sociology, and I remember the first lecture the professor was saying, "Hello and welcome to sociology." Probably your parents are thinking like, "What the hell are you guys doing? What kind of time? Why are you wasting your time? Why am I paying for this?" Um, and it was the best courses I've ever taken. I'm just wondering, is there a perception that game design is a waste of time by some?
I'm sure that games have always been regarded as the um, something which you merely tolerate because it brings in undergraduates.
Ah,
They're not academically respected by most of the rest of the university. Individuals will, they'll treat you, if you say you do games, oh, that's quite interesting. They'll chat and they might have some ideas for games, but they don't regard it as a serious subject in the same sense that they would some of the humanities, some of the social sciences. Um, so,
that's incredible, though. I mean,
well,
yeah,
but yeah, you say that, but the world in general is like that.
yeah, it's true.
How many knights of the realm are there who are actors? Oh, loads of them. Film directors. Oh, plenty of them.
Hmm.
Authors. Oh, yes, lots of people who write books. But music composers. But we don't have any game designers, and I'll be dead before we get any. It's not regarded as as high culture,
Hmm.
and because of that, while games attract undergraduates, we're safe. While it doesn't, as soon as it starts to tail off, then games will be for the axe. That's just how it is.
Hmm. On that depressing note of talking about something that has absolutely no value in human life, but still we enjoy it a lot. And I still don't know if I'm the total outlier as someone who really enjoys just walking through other people's minds without any reward or any goal. Um, I thank you very much, Richard, for coming into Sansar. You're looking very good. As I understand, this is a fairly a default avatar, but I think you own him now. I think he should be renamed the Richard A. Bartle model in the Sansar carousel of the avatars. And yeah, that's the Drax Files Radio Hour. Without Joe Yardley, Joe is still suffering from bandwidth problems in the Dutch countryside, and she will be back very soon. I hope to see you again in Sansar, Richard. Thank you
I'm
so
sure
much for coming.
I'll be here. Bye. My pleasure.
Bye. Okay, I'm going to cut my stream. Ah, you can wave. Wait, we gotta do this again for the camera. See, I think they read your book at Linden Lab.